Okay, this video is some urgent advice to people to be very careful about some information that's being peddled on the internet right now that could get you into serious financial trouble. So I'll come on to exactly what that information is and how it could get you into trouble in just a second. But just on a broader point, there are quite a few people out there who are selling how to buy business courses or how to buy businesses with no money down, and they actually don't have the experience that they are claiming to have. And one of my delegates reached out to me today to show me a clip of a video by one of these competitors who is basically giving advice that could get you in so much financial trouble. It's dangerous, and so I really want to walk you through what that advice is and how it can be dangerous. And I'd just like to add to this, you know, before you give someone thousands, in this case tens of thousands of pounds to go on a training program or a course or whatever, please do a little bit of due diligence into these people. This particular person has had a career where they've only sold courses. That's all they've done. They're a professional at selling you training courses, and yet if you look at their LinkedIn profile, it would suggest that they've only ever done deals and that they've got 20 years of deal making experience. Just go on to Google, type their name in, search around and see how far back you can find information about them doing deals, because what you'll find is that they publish tons and tons and tons of content about doing deals, but you won't find anything pre sort of 2018 or something like that. So please just invest a little bit of time finding out if they've actually got the experience, because what these people do is they teach from logic and they sound very certain and very positive, so they suck a lot of people into that into that kind of idea that they're peddling. And the challenge is they haven't really bought that many businesses. They haven't done deals during a recession, so they don't know what it's like when you're trying to catch that falling knife in a crisis like this. And they're giving you advice that sounds fine and logical, and like I say, you could end up getting yourself in trouble. So you know, if somebody's trying to sell you a cheap course and then there's a mastermind program or some extra program that you have to buy or some other thing that you have to buy, they're probably a training company, and so they're probably really focused on selling you training courses and not really an active deal maker, or they're doing some small deals, but they're probably just using leverage or using a fairly boring deal structure to try and create that credibility that they're very active in their space. So please just do your research. It takes take a little bit of time, search around the internet. It doesn't matter if they've made mistakes or if it's bad information or good information or whatever, but just some evidence that they were doing deals. If they've written books or they've published articles or they've done interviews or there've been notifications or anything in the last 5 or 10 years, does that match the story that they're telling you? Does that match the story that they have on their LinkedIn profile and on their website about their deal history? So please just do that research before you part with your hard-earned money. It's a very simple thing to do, and I just recommend everybody to do their due diligence. So here's the advice. This person was actually telling people on a video interview that was shared with me by one of my delegates, saying that in this crisis it's a great opportunity to buy businesses, which is absolutely true, and that if you have an existing business, you can buy the assets of a competitor. Don't buy the shares in the competitor, buy the assets of the competitor to grow your existing business. Now this can be a little bit dangerous on two levels. Now I agree that this is a great time to bolt additional businesses onto your company, and I think this is a great time to grow your business through acquisition or to do a roll-up or a consolidation of your sector, and there are loads of really smart ways to do that, and to do that without using cash up front or lots of capital. But here's why that general piece of advice that they were giving is incredibly dangerous. For a start, if you use your existing successful company to enter into agreements with a company that's potentially distressed or going to go through some kind of bankruptcy in the future, you create what is called contracting party risk. And that means your company name is on a contract, and it means you can be sued under that contract for any kind of breach of contract. Now, if the business goes into insolvency, that means you have an insolvency practitioner that's dealing with you. The second thing that's a real challenge is that owners of businesses sometimes forget that the limited company is a separate legal entity to them. And so when you buy the assets of a company, let's say you pay £20,000 to someone for the assets of their company, what tends to happen is that they use that $20,000 for their own personal needs. So they will pay off pay something towards their mortgage, or they'll use it to solve some financial problems for themselves. forgetting that the company has creditors. And those creditors, as a director of the company, that business owner's first duty under the law is to the creditors of that company. And people often forget that everything kind of gets merged together. There aren't that many professional directors operating around the world who run businesses. So you have this conflict where, quite often it's the same person who is an employee, a director, and a shareholder. So you get those kind of conflicts that come out of that. So, what can happen is they sell you the assets. They then run off and spend the money. Now, when an insolvency practitioner liquidates the company, the first thing they were going to want to know is, where are the assets? And did that business owner dispose of them at fair value for the creditors? And so you can find yourself in a legal wrangling with an insolvency practitioner who's trying to claw those assets back because they were disposed of under value, or they were disposed of and none of that value came to the creditors. So you can end up finding yourself on the receiving end of some pretty nasty approaches from insolvency practitioners or the insolvency service, trying to look at the transaction that you did. Now, there is an argument that possession is 9/10 of the law and that you can, try and manage your way through that situation. But why create all of that shit in the first place when there are ways to do it much smarter so that you don't get caught out? The final kind of big issue I guess I have with this advice is that when you buy the assets of a company, that doesn't remove your obligations under something called 2P. Now, this is a European law, so if you're watching this outside of Europe, this isn't so relevant for you. But 2P, T-U-P-E, is the transfer of undertakings for the protection of employment. And what that means is that when you buy the assets of a company, you're also deemed to have taken on all of its staff. So what happens in this current situation where staff are furloughed and businesses are at a very low ebb is you end up buying the business, you inherit all of those employment rights. So what happens is, although you've only bought the assets and you think, oh, I've grown my customer base, I've grown the business, what actually happens is that as soon as those employees are allowed to come back to work, they all can come back to work for you, and if you don't allow them to come back to work for you, then it's deemed as constructive dismissal, and you'll end up with loads of wrongful dismissal claims against you in an employment tribunal, and these can be pretty meaty. These can be huge sums of money that you can find yourself on the hook for. There's all the redundancy payments, unused holiday, all of that kind of stuff you would have to pay out. So in fact, it's much better. There's two key solutions that you need to use here. The first one is, don't use your company to go and acquire your competitors. Always use a special purpose vehicle. It's a separate limited company that you've set up just to do a transaction. It's very cheap to set up a limited company, have one sitting there waiting, ready to do a deal, and that should be the contracting party in any transaction that you do, because it has no assets. So if something does go wrong, you've got the ability to liquidate that business and kind of walk away from it, instead of having it as a contagion, interesting word to use in this crisis, a contagion to your existing business. Then the other key thing to make sure that you do is, I would actually buy the shares in the company and deal with the liquidation and closing down of that business and the acquisition of the good assets if you want to take some good assets out of it. Or you may even find that once you have control of the company, that you can turn it around fairly easy with a few of the financial engineering tricks that we talk about on the Harbour Club. And then if there are skeletons in the closet, if there are things that you're not expecting, then you can move the assets into your new co. You'll also find that this is more efficient from a cost perspective, because when you buy assets, you have to demonstrate the assets were transferred at fair value. And this is a test under the Insolvency Act of 1986 that an insolvency practitioner would look at. So therefore you have to pay for the assets. You don't have an excuse other than to pay for the assets. Now, shares, on the other hand, in a business that perhaps is underperforming, it's very easy to argue that shares are worthless, and there's no rules or regulations around what price you sell shares at. The value of shares is the last price you sold them for. So look, if you want to learn how to do this stuff properly, come and learn from professionals, not people who are professionals at selling you training courses. If you want to find out more, go to harbourclubevents.com, ask me questions in the boxes below, and I will answer as many as I can, because I genuinely want to save you from getting into trouble from this kind of nonsense advice that's being peddled by these people. Good luck, and go do deals.